I'm going to show you how to make a boxed cushion cover for your upholstered chair. The cushion I have here is a foam and feather wrap cushion, which gives really nice support for your piece of furniture. You can see it's got a band all the way round, and we need to make the cover to fit the cushion nice and snugly. Now, to make that snug cushion cover, we take the measurements for the box cushion. I want to measure the width of the cushion, both at the front and the back of the cushion, because the front may differ to the back. And I want to measure the depth of the cushion from front to back of the cushion. And I also need to measure the depth of the band here. I've made a template for the box cushion. The template is the actual size of the cushion itself. The seam allowances are then included in that template. The reason being is the seam allowances will be 2 centimetres, which will shrink that cushion up by 4 centimetres once it's fitted into the chair. That will give it a nice plump finish to the cover, and it will sit in the chair nice and snugly too. So that is the top and the bottom template for the cushion. I have then made a pattern for the bands that go from the sides and around the front edge of the cushion and up the other side. And that will take you around the front and the sides as so, but not all the way up to the top, because the zip band will take you around the back and down around the sides as well. Once you've made your templates, you're now ready to start cutting your fabric. When you cut your fabric, you need to make sure that you've got the fabric the right way up, that you've got any pattern in the right direction, and you need to make sure you've got any stripes going where you want it to go. You will decide where you want the pattern to be on your top of your cover. So you will have to mark a position on your template where you want that pattern to go. Any particular stripe, you will need to make sure that the stripe is marked on the template as well. You will also need to mark on your band where the stripes or the patterns are to match the top and bottom of the cover. The zip band, you will be cutting 2 of those, and I can explain why in a moment. You will notice on the template that I have marked 12 centimetres down both sides from the top edge of the cover. That is where the zip band will be stitched and how far down it will go down to the side. The zip band will be stitched along the top edge of the cover and 12 centimetres down each side. The side and front bands will be stitched from the end of the zip band all the way down the side, around the front and up the side. I have allowed 2 centimetre seam allowance on my pattern. I have added the 2 centimetres to my band pattern, and the zip band has to be cut in 2 pieces because the zip goes through the centre of the zip band. So to do that, I have measured the depth of the band on the cushion, divided that into 2, halved it, and then I've added my 2 centimetre seam allowances to the top and the bottom edge of those zip bands. The band on the cushion measures 9 centimetres. I have made the band for the cover that 9 centimetres plus 2 centimetres either side of that band. So that's given me on this particular cover a band template of 13 centimetres. The zip band will be half of that 9 centimetres, which is 4.5, plus I have added another 4 centimetres to that zip band pattern. And I need to cut 2 of those. Following on from making your template, you then need to cut out your fabric. I've already done that. I've cut out my pattern with my top fabric for my chair. That is the top of the cushion cover. This will be my band to go all the way around the front and up part way the sides. And these are my 2 zip bands that will go across the back and meet the side band at the side of the cushion. You will see I've marked the wrong side of my fabric for the cushion cover. When you have a regular sized cover, it's quite difficult to remember which is the top or the bottom of the cover. So I have marked my cover with a WS and a little arrow that points to the top or the back of the cushion. This WS is only marked in the seam allowance, so it won't show when you finish the cushion. You'll also notice that I've marked the zip band with a small arrow pointing up towards the top edge of the zip band. Again, that is in the seam allowance, so that you won't see it when the cushion is made. On my pieces that I've cut out, I have already prepared the raw edges by overlocking the edges. You may want to zigzag the edges if you've got a zigzag on your sewing machine, or you may just want to pink the edges with pinking shears. It makes it much easier for you to neaten the edges before you start making the piece up. Otherwise, you end up with lots of frayed edges when you're trying to sew. When I overlock my edges, I actually take a slight 0.5 centimetre off of all the edges, so that I'm actually reducing the original 2 centimetre seam allowance to 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. In a moment you'll see why I've done that. Once you've cut out all your pieces for your cushion cover, you're then ready to put the piping onto the top and bottom of the cover. My piping has already been made. I cut my piping strips to 5 centimetres wide. I use a 5mm piping cord, although that may change according to the piping you've got on your upholstered piece. When I make my piping, I overlock the edges to get a nice neat flange. The overlocking provides me with a flange of 1.5 centimetres. That is going to be my seam allowance. And that is the reason why when I overlock my cushion cover pieces, that I take off 0.5 centimetre all the way around the edges. Again, you can do that by trimming if you're using pinking shears or when you're zigzagging on your machine. I need to start putting the piping on to the cover. I've marked the top of the cover with a pin in the centre of the back of the cover. I'm going to open up about 6 centimetres of the top edge of my piping. Trim that away. So I've got 6 centimetres of my piping cord and my piping just left loose. Now I'm going to pin that at the top so that the start of my stitching is just going to be slightly off centre of the centre pin. On this particular sewing machine, I like to use my zipper foot to do my piping with. My machine can move my needle across in increments, so I can get closer to the piping each time I add an extra layer to the cover. When I'm making my soft furnishings, I like to use a stitch length of 3, that's 3mm. Basically because the fabric is thicker than most fabrics, and it gives, I think, it gives a nicer seam finish. I'm going to start sewing my piping now. I'm not pinning it all the way round because the piping sometimes moves around the cover as you sew it. But what I do is align the edge of the piping to the edge of the cushion as I sew. So I'm just going to start and work towards the corner, and then I will show you how to turn a corner tidily. When I get to within 5 centimetres of the corner, I need to help that piping go around the corner to work down the next side. But what I'm going to do is to imagine I have a little box, a 1.5 centimetre box on the side of that piping here where the pin is. And I'm going to cut into the corner of that box, a diagonal cut into the corner of that box. Then I'm going to stitch up to that cut and leave the needle in the work. Lift the foot up and move your work round so it faces you again, and turn the piping around that corner so that it lines up with the edge of the fabric again, and you can start sewing. So I have sewn one corner, and you can see the little snip there which helps that piping to turn that corner nice and neatly, and I will do all the other 4 corners exactly the same way, and I will stitch all the way round to within about 6 centimetres of the start of my sewing. I'm going to stitch to within 6 centimetres of the start of the piping. Now I'm ready to do the join in this piping. You can see that little tail here. I'm going to cut that off. Like that, so I've got a spare piece of fabric. I'm now going to cut off this part of the piping that's left to butt up to the piping underneath. There, can you see it butting tightly there? I need to fold over the start of the piping with a diagonal fold, as so. I can then tuck the end of the piping right inside. You see I've lined that up neatly there. Tuck the end of the piping in, bring that fold over so you've got a nice straight line. Just going to lift the foot up to tuck that piece underneath. And a little tip, use the point of your little scissors just to hold that down, to keep your fingers out of the way, and then stitch all that to join. Stitch along that line there to join. As so. Before you attach your piping, you might want to just take a little moment to plan where any joins in your piping is going to be. The piping will start and end at the centre back, but you may have had to make a join in your piping before you attach the piping on. As you can see, I've got the join of the piping along the side edge of the cushion. You wouldn't want to see that join along the front edge of the cover. Now we're ready to make the zip band. Here are my zip band pieces. I have a bottom piece and a top piece. The top piece of the zip band I have pressed over 2 centimetres to the wrong side of the zip band. The bottom of the zip band I have pressed over 1 centimetre to the wrong side. I'm using a continuous zipper for my zip band, but you can purchase a zip from a haberdashery shop. You just need to make sure you get it the right length. I just make sure my zips are just a little bit longer than the zip band. When you buy continuous zipping, you buy it quite often as just the zip without the slider attached. A lot of people have many problems trying to get the slider attached to their zip. I'm just going to show you how to do it. A very simple, easy way to connect the slider to your zip. Here I've got some nice wide zipping and a chunky slider. I'm just going to open the top of the zip a fraction, and I'm going to cut the right hand side of the zip tape down towards the zip teeth, like so. Then I'm going to take the rounded end of the slider and slide it onto the left hand side of the tape, like that. Bring the slider down towards the diagonal cut and then turn the right hand tape of the zip almost at right angles to slide the teeth into the right hand side of the slider. Then you can get hold of the 2 top pieces of the zip here and just pull the slider on. You will see I've just stitched across the end of my zip. Once I've got the slider on, I've just used the machine to stitch the teeth together. That stops the slider from being pulled off accidentally. You wouldn't want that to happen, and it's very difficult to get back on again once the zip is stitched in place. I'm going to pin the bottom part of my zip band onto the zip. And I'm matching, that's the bottom part is the one with the 1 centimetre turning. And I'm pinning that folded edge tight against the teeth. I don't need to pin all the way down, I can just machine that. But if you feel a bit unsecure about machining without pins, feel free to carry on pinning. I've moved the zipper foot over so that my needle is stitching close to the top of the fold and close to the teeth of the zip. And I'm going to stitch all the way down the length of the zip. So that's the bottom of the zip band stitched to the zip. Now I'm ready to stitch the top of the zip band on. This time I'm going to stitch it from the reverse side. I'm going to line up the top edge of the zip with the top edge of the seam allowance that I've pressed over and pin that down. Take it to the machine and again machine that fairly close to the teeth. As I'm stitching, I'm lining up the top of the zip band with the top edge of that seam allowance, and in a moment I'll show you why. That's the reverse of the zip band, And this is the top edge of the zip band, the right side of the zip band. You can see now that the zip is hidden underneath a flap of fabric. When I stitched the back of the zip onto the top edge of the seam allowance, it created that flap on the right side, and the zip is hidden. I've now stitched the zip band to the front and side band, and I've just stitched it with a plain seam, and I've made sure that the slider is on the right side of the seam. If the slider was up here, you wouldn't be able to close or open the cushion cover. So make sure the slider is within the zip band. Now I'm ready to sew the zip band and front and side bands onto the top of the cushion cover. I'm going down the side from the back edge of the cushion cover about 10 centimetres and placing the zip band 10 centimetres down that side edge. Just mark it with a pin. There. And now I'm going to start sewing that round. I don't pin as I sew, especially on plain fabric like this. I just make sure that the edges are matching all the way round. If you've got stripes or a pattern fabric to match, it's important that you do pin as you match up the pattern. I've just moved my zipper foot again and my needle position so that my needle can get as tight to the piping as possible, because I'm sandwiching that piping in between the cover and the zip band, and I don't want to see any of the previous stitching. I'm not starting right at the end of the zip band. I'm going to leave that bit free because we're going to join that together when we come back to the beginning again. Now, as I stitch around the cushion, I don't want to move the band to fit around the corners. What I'm going to do is to move the cushion around and keep the zip band and the side and front bands straight out in front of me. Watch as I do this. Come to the corner. You can lift the foot of the machine and pivot the corner around, keeping the edges matched up to the band. Pivot the top fabric round. Keeping the edges matched together. It's important when you come to the corners of the cushion cover to keep all the edges of the fabric aligned and to keep the bands straight out in front of you. Stitch up to the corner and then pivot the fabric, the top layer of fabric, around on the band. Lift the foot up, pivot the fabric round, put the foot down again. All the time keeping the edges matched. And if you do the corners like that, you end up with very neat corners where the piping is. If you stitch the corners just as I've shown you, you'll end up with beautifully piped corners like that. I'm almost around to the beginning of my stitching on the bands now. I've stitched all 4 corners and I'm now ready to stitch the 2 ends of the band together. I'm going to stitch up to within about 4 centimetres of the join. And then I need to take it out of the sewing machine. And this is the part that I need to join together. I want to fold back the seam allowance of the zip band and fold back the seam allowance of the side band, or the excess piece. You notice that's a little bit longer than it needs to be, so that the folds butt up together like that. I then need to pinch those together and pin. I now need to sew down that join there. So the seam allowances are now joined, the zip band and the side band is now joined, but you can see I still have a gap there where I stopped my sewing on the side. I need to stitch that together, but I need to trim off this excess first. So into the machine again. And there we have it, your band all stitched to your cushion cover. This is actually stitched to the bottom of the cover, and you can tell that by the way that the band, zip band, is positioned. The flap on the zip band should face downwards towards the bottom of the cushion. On a plain cover like this, that's not quite so important because the cushion can be reversed. But if it's a patterned or a striped cover or fabric, you make sure that you stitch the band with the flap going down towards the bottom of the cushion. I'm now ready to fit the top of the cover onto the rest of the band. Before you start, make sure that the zip is open slightly, because once you've sewn round it, if the zip is closed, you won't be able to turn this cover inside out. I'm going to match up the back of the cushion cover with the back of the one I've already sewn, match it at the corners and make a note with a pin of where that side seam comes. And do the same on the other side as well. So match up the corners and make a note of where the second side seam comes. And then you can start pinning that in place. I do like to pin the second part of the cover onto the band to make sure it's accurate. You can use your finger to follow the bottom corner up the band so you can place the top corner level with it like that. And you can do the same on all corners. Or another way to do it, cutting into your band, is to fold the band at the corner like that and do a little snip, little V snip. Like that. And then you can match that corner up to the V snip. If you just give a pull on the side and make sure that the side fits, you haven't got any baggy bits at the side. And you can do the same again. Check that front edge, and then you can check the second side edge there. Now that is ready to sew. I'm going to start sewing in the centre back of the cover, again matching all the edges up, stitching towards the corner. This time I haven't got the zip band out in front of me, but I still have to treat it as though it is still in front of me. So I'm stitching towards the corner, take the pin out, keeping the edges matching. I'm keeping the zip band fairly tight facing me, and I'm pivoting the top of the cushion cover around. Lift the foot up to help. And then match all the sides up again and continue stitching all the way round. All finished. Tidy up any loose ends. Give it a nice tidy up inside. And there we are, one completed cushion cover. Just turn it inside out. Push all the corners out. Make sure they're all nice and neat. You haven't got any stitching showing on the piping. Zip it up. And one completed box cushion cover. Once you've got the cushion pad inside the cover, it's important to get the piping laying nicely. So slide your hand inside and push the seam from the piping down towards the band, and do that all the way round, top and bottom. Okay. And it sets the piping up really well on that cushion and makes it stand proud of that cushion cover. Make sure you do it around the back edge as well, and then you're ready to zip it all up. See, it's a nice snug finish. Once you've got the piping all standing nicely on that cover, you can zip up and have a completed box cushion cover.